pretty weak run, that first one, so.
Let's do it.
Well, you can tell, look at that. Look at that material coming on the end of that. It's still really dirty.
It is, yeah. Pretty good hole, Wano.
Go on that bank, huh? Maybe?
Just gonna do a little test on their coarse tailings coming off. See if there's gold coming out of it.
Freddy and Juan thought it was just another dead-end site. The old rail line had been abandoned for decades, rusted tracks leading into the unknown, whispered about in local legends, but ignored by everyone who walked past. Most would have turned away, convinced it held nothing but old ties and broken rails. But Freddy saw a pattern, a trail that others missed. He convinced Juan to follow it step by step, deeper into the wilderness. What they found wasn't just history. It was gold, real gold, massive, glimmering, impossible to ignore. A fortune worth $72 million. Every ounce told a story of risk, persistence, and sharp instincts. Rival miners would be stunned, locals would talk for years, and Freddy and Juan would have rewritten the rules of discovery. The abandoned rail line had kept its secret for decades, but now it had finally led the right men to unimaginable wealth. Before we start, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe now. It began with a scouting trip, nothing more than Freddy hiking through overgrown scrub when he spotted it. Rails, twisted with rust, half devoured by weeds. They led nowhere, vanishing into trees like a scar left by men long gone. But these weren't ordinary tracks. Old miners swore they were never built for freight, but for smuggling treasure out of the hills. Juan remembered a darker tale of a ghost train that vanished one night and never returned. And here it was, staring them in the face, a rail line that didn't end naturally. It simply stopped, as if swallowed whole by the earth. The deeper they dug, the stranger the trail became. In town archives, Freddy turned brittle pages that spoke of a mining syndicate gone bankrupt in 1897. But the numbers didn't add up. Where had all their gold gone? Elders in the cafe leaned across tables, insisting the trains hauled more than ore. One even whispered about a derailment nobody ever reported in the papers. That night, a retired rail worker broke his silence. His grandfather had sworn about sealed cars hidden in a canyon, locked away forever. By the time Freddy and Juan walked back into the forest, the idea had taken root. This wasn't folklore anymore. Somewhere down that rail line, millions could still be waiting. Juan launched a drone over the final stretch of track, its buzzing camera slicing through treetops. There, half buried under brush, lay the skeletal remains of a trestle collapsed decades ago. But beneath the rubble, the drone's feed caught something impossible. A void, a perfect black mouth carved into the hillside. Freddy scrambled down to check it, boots slipping in loose shale, and nearly fell straight into the opening. Stone blocks framed the entrance, carved smooth with old pick marks. Bolts of iron still jutted from the walls, untouched for 100 years. The rails, they didn't just end here, they vanished into the mountain itself, leading somewhere no one had walked since the 1800s. Freddy paused at the lip of the opening, staring into the darkness as if the hillside were daring him to step inside. Juan dropped the drone feed onto a handheld screen, both of them leaning close, the grainy image flickering over the jagged void. A low hush fell between them, the forest suddenly quiet, as if the mountain itself held its breath. "We have to see it," Freddy muttered, and Juan nodded. They adjusted their headlamps, checked their gear, and stepped carefully into the mouth of the tunnel, the world outside fading behind them. The floodlights cut thin white beams through the suffocating dark, their glow swallowed by the tunnel's damp stone. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, each man acutely aware that they were trespassing in a place sealed away for over a century. The ground squelched beneath their boots, layers of mud, swallowing what remained of the once smooth rail ties. Then, half buried under stagnant water, Juan's light caught something, an iron wheel, rimmed with rust, protruding from the muck. Freddy crouched low, brushing it with his gloved hand. It wasn't just any wheel, it was part of a train car, left to rot mid-journey, proof that something massive had been abandoned here, deliberately entombed by the earth. The silence was so thick that when Juan took a step forward, the metallic echo rang down the corridor like a bell, bouncing back with a hollow resonance that made the crew stiffen. The deeper they pushed, the more unnatural it felt. The air pressed heavy on their chests, hot and stale, as though the tunnels themselves had been sealed airtight, still breathing like a creature in slumber. The tunnel constricted, drawing them toward a wall of collapse at the far end. Stone blocks jutted outward. Timbers snapped like matchsticks from the pressure of a cave-in. Freddy swung his light higher and caught it. Not a natural blockage, but a door, a barricade, hidden beneath the rubble. The shape was unmistakable, edges squared, corners braced, something designed to keep men out, rather than to give way. His pulse hammered. If this wasn't just rockfall, if someone had gone to lengths to conceal what lay beyond, then the stories weren't lies. The fortune could be real. They returned the next day with heavier gear. The hum of hydraulic jacks filled the tunnel as steel pressed against ancient beams. With each crank, the barricade moaned. Dust cascaded down, choking the air, making eyes sting and lungs burn. Juan wrapped a cloth over his mouth and kept pushing. The timbers creaked like bones under strain, refusing to surrender after 100 years. Then snap. A shudder rolled through the barricade. The men froze, waiting for the mountain itself to collapse. But instead, the first beam broke free, crashing into the mud with a thunderous splash. Behind it, more timbers loomed, stacked deliberately, as though built to guard a vault. Freddy wiped grime from his forehead, his beam catching something carved deep into the wood grain. 3 interlocked circles. His heart skipped. He'd seen those markings before, not in any mine, but in dusty lodge records. Masonic, secretive, powerful. One by one, the barricade gave way. With each strike, the jacks drove deeper, beams snapping and falling, until finally, silence. A sudden draft surged forward, blasting them with a wave of air stale and warm, carrying the scent of earth, long hidden. They held their breath as the final timber toppled free, revealing a yawning black throat beyond. The light from their lamps disappeared into it, swallowed whole. No sound, no movement, just an open door, waiting for the first footsteps in over a century. They crossed the threshold. The chamber that met them wasn't small. It stretched high, walls lined with blackened stone blocks, some still scorched from lantern smoke, long dead. Rails continued through the chamber, perfect lines vanishing into shadows beyond. But what gripped them wasn't the architecture. It was the sight frozen mid-motion. Carts sat on the rails, their wheels rusted solid, still in formation, like they'd been abandoned mid-task. The mud around them was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of men since the day it was sealed. Juan approached the nearest cart, brushing thick layers of dust from its frame. Inside lay crates, stacked and rotting, stamped faintly with the word machinery. He leaned into it, straining his back to budge the weight. His voice broke the silence. "This doesn't weigh like machinery." Freddy pulled a crowbar from his pack, sliding the edge beneath warped planks. With one sharp strike, the wood cracked, the lid split, revealing a gleam that didn't belong in the dark. Sheets of dull grey lead, carefully wrapped, stacked layer upon layer. Freddy's hands trembled as he peeled one back, and there it was, the unmistakable glow of gold. Bars, squared and stamped, preserved beneath lead to disguise their shine. He exhaled sharply, his voice little more than a whisper. It's real. The crew's lights swung wildly, excitement igniting their movements. More crates, more weight, more boxes marked machinery that clearly carried far more. The room was no accident. It wasn't a simple storehouse. This was engineered concealment, an underground vault. Freddy's gaze shifted to the far wall, where 3 archways opened into further darkness, their tops lined with keystones black with soot. If this chamber was only the beginning, then beyond those arches could lie something far greater. He tightened his grip on the crowbar, the enormity sinking in. They hadn't just stumbled onto gold, they had uncovered an entire system, a hidden network meant to swallow a fortune whole and leave no trace above ground. And this was only the first room. As the men began to spread out, their footsteps stirring the dust and echoes, Freddy's eyes lingered on the walls, scanning the soot-stained stone. Shadows pooled in corners, and the faint hum of dripping water filled the silence. That's when he saw it, half hidden behind a fallen timber, faint scratches etched into the rock. He crouched closer, brushing away grime, until the words revealed themselves. Train 47. Final load, September 1897. His blood ran cold. Train 47 wasn't just a number. It was the ghost train. The same one whispered about in miners' taverns, the same one town records never accounted for. A train that vanished without a trace, taking its last run into silence. And now, here, underground, was its final mark. Juan lifted the lid of another crate. Inside wasn't gold this time, but paper, brittle and yellowed with age. He carefully unfolded it, his hands shaking under the weight of the discovery. A manifest. Its columns listed 2,000 ore units, a phrase that meant nothing to the uninitiated. But Freddy knew. This wasn't ore, this was code. Ore units were bullion bars, disguised in ledgers to mask their true value. His jaw tightened as the realization hit. What they had found wasn't a stash abandoned by desperate men. This was a full shipment, hidden and sealed, never delivered, never reported, lost to history for over a century. The ghost train wasn't a story. It was buried in front of them. The chamber went dead silent. No one dared speak. Their breaths were shallow, ragged, as if even sound might awaken something buried with the gold. The weight of it pressed down on their chests. The gold, the lies, the decades of silence that had covered up the disappearance of a fortune. Then the mountain itself seemed to respond. A tremor rolled through the stone, shaking dust from the ceiling. Pebbles scattered at their feet, the echo booming down the chamber like thunder. Juan's gas detector shrieked, lights flashing red. Methane. Thick, invisible, deadly. Freddy barked for everyone to freeze. One spark, one careless strike of metal against stone, and the entire cavern could ignite like a furnace. The men glanced at one another, fear flashing in their eyes, the temptation to run clawing at their minds. But Freddy's voice cut through the panic. We're not leaving it. Not now. Not when we're standing on 70 million. His words were steady, firm, but the veins stood out on his neck. He was gambling lives against gold, and every man there knew it. Juan was already moving, shoving equipment into place. He rigged fans from spare parts, cobbling together a crude ventilation system to keep the air moving. The fans groaned, coughing against the heavy atmosphere, but slowly the choking weight lifted. Gas levels dropped, the detectors easing their shrill cries, though not silent. Danger still lingered in the air, like a predator, watching from the shadows. Freddy forced them onward, past the trembling stone, past the fear. Every step was a battle between instinct to flee and the lure of untold riches. They reached the second archway. Unlike the first, this one wasn't collapsed. It was sealed deliberately, stone fitted tight with mortar that had long since cracked. The marks of chisels scarred its surface, proof that men had built it with intent. Freddy and Juan attacked it with bars and jacks, the sound of stones splitting echoing down the tunnel. The air quivered with each strike. Finally, with a groan like a sigh from the earth itself, the arch crumbled. A gust of ancient air blasted out, heavy with the metallic tang of iron and something else, something richer. Their lights pierced the darkness, and jaws fell open. Before them stretched a chamber unlike the first. Crates, endless crates, stacked in careful order, each one braced against collapse, each one stamped and sealed. The beams of light swept across the stacks, catching flashes of dull grey lead where lids had split. Freddy stepped forward, tearing open the nearest crate. Gold, bar after bar, their edges sharp, their surfaces stamped with seals, half-eaten by corrosion. He lifted one, hands trembling, the weight of it more than physical. In the beam of his light, the stamp became clear, a seal belonging to a mine lost in the panic of 1893, a mine thought bankrupt, its wealth erased from the records. But here it was, not erased at all, hidden, sealed, waiting. Juan pulled another ledger from a broken crate. Dust puffed into the air as he flipped the pages. The numbers were staggering, translating to $72 million in today's value. Each entry confirmed it, line after line, a trail of wealth smuggled from the mines, packed into rail cars, buried beneath the earth. Freddy's voice cracked as he held the bar higher, the gold glowing dully in the pale light. His knuckles whitened around it, his breath shallow. Around him, the crew stood frozen, staring at the impossible fortune. No words, no cheers, only silence, broken by the sound of their own hearts pounding in their chests. They weren't just standing in a tunnel, they were standing inside one of the greatest lost caches in American mining history. A ghost train's final cargo sealed away for over 100 years, hidden in darkness until this very moment. And now, it was theirs, if they could survive the mountain trying to keep it buried. For a long moment, no one moved. Each man let the weight of history settle on their shoulders, the gold gleaming like a silent promise and a warning. Then, slowly, instinct and necessity took over. Plans were whispered, hands adjusted, and the first crates were touched. The ore didn't vanish. It fueled their careful, deliberate movements, every step measured as they prepared to carry the treasure out. The work began in silence, each man moving like a shadow beneath the weight of history. Finding the gold had been one thing. Extracting it, without alerting the world, was another. Every crate was a back-breaking puzzle, every ounce a burden that seemed to grow heavier the closer it came to daylight. Freddy stood at the tunnel mouth, jaw tight, as Juan engineered solutions in the dark. He built pulley rigs from scavenged beams and chains, his hands blistered, his shirt clinging with sweat. The makeshift machines creaked and groaned as they carried the first crates upward, each squeal echoing like a scream across the stone. The men worked without rest, the sound of their breath mixing with the rattle of chains and the grind of rusted wheels. The carts themselves resisted movement, wheels locked with a century of decay. Juan poured oil, struck them with hammers, forced them forward 1 inch at a time until the rails screamed in protest. The first cart rose, groaning, as though dragging ghosts behind it. Above, guards kept watch with rifles in hand, pacing the tree line, ears straining for the snap of twigs or the click of distant binoculars. The gold wasn't just treasure now, it was a secret war fought in silence against unseen enemies. At night, the operation shifted. Trucks backed in under the cloak of darkness, engines cut, their beds cloaked in heavy tarps. Gold bars were ferried in gloved hands, loaded like contraband, covered with dirt, shovels, and broken scrap. No headlights, no noise, just the sound of boots on gravel and the thud of metal striking wood. Freddy allowed no daylight work, no risks. A single curious glance from a passerby could bring everything crashing down. Each night, the convoy moved slow and silent through back roads, headlights blacked out, hauling history into hiding. But the mountain seemed to know its secrets were being stolen. Every cart that rose from the depths felt like it carried more than weight. It carried defiance, as if the earth itself strained to pull it back down. Men whispered that the rails groaned not with steel, but with spirits, the sound of the ghost train protesting its own unearthing. They spoke little otherwise, their silence wrapped in fear as tightly as the gold was wrapped in lead. Still, silence never holds forever. Rumors began to slip through cracks in the night. First whispers in the taverns, carried in hushed tones over whiskey. Then sharper words at the supply store, questions too casual, eyes that lingered too long. Rival miners drifted close to the ridge, boots crunching in the brush, their outlines just visible against the skyline. Some carried binoculars, lenses catching the moonlight. Others lit lanterns, where no light should be, leaving glowing orbs on the horizon, as if to remind. Freddy and Juan, they were being watched. Stories spread faster than the gold could be moved. Some swore a treasure train had been pulled from the earth, a lost shipment finally unearthed. Others whispered that Freddy and Juan had broken open a vault built by secret societies, treasure cursed to anyone who touched it. The truth was worse than both, because it was real, and real gold drew real enemies. Freddy felt it in his bones. He had seen greed twist men into animals before, had seen partnerships dissolve into betrayal when ounces of gold were on the line. Now, with millions stacked in crates, he feared history might repeat itself. Collapse, betrayal, death. He ordered the pace doubled. No breaks, no excuses. Sleep became a memory, meals no more than bread, swallowed between shifts. The men grew pale, their eyes ringed with exhaustion, but none dared stop. They all knew rivals circled closer each day, closing in like wolves on a wounded elk. Then came the final haul. Dawn crept slow across the horizon, light spilling over the tree line as the last crate groaned up the rails. The pulleys strained, timbers bent, and the tunnel itself seemed to resist, trembling as though it would collapse rather than surrender its last secret. But the crate rose inch by inch until it breached the daylight. It landed heavy on the ground, the rails shivering with the force, the sound carrying across the still forest like a gunshot. Silence followed. Not relief, not cheers, just silence, the kind that presses on the ears. Freddy staggered back, his body coated in dirt and sweat, and stared. Before him lay the impossible, gold stacked high, row after row of crates, bars gleaming even beneath their dull lead wrappings. $72 million in lost history, once buried beneath stone, now standing in the pale light of morning. His chest heaved, but his voice was silent, his throat too dry to speak. Juan stood beside him, his face shadowed, his eyes locked on the mouth of the tunnel. The mountain loomed dark behind them, the rails disappearing into its depths like a scar. His words came quiet, almost reverent, as though speaking too loudly might wake what still lingered below. This rail line wasn't abandoned, he said. It was buried alive. The numbers were checked and tallied. The ledgers matched, the bars weighed. $72 million, a figure almost too large to believe, now confirmed in steel and stone. The ghost train was no longer myth. Its disappearance was no longer mystery. The fortune it carried had been smothered by greed, sealed by time, and now dragged into daylight by two men unwilling to let it stay silent. And yet, as the last truck doors slammed shut and the engines rumbled to life, neither Freddy nor Juan smiled. They knew too well what they had unearthed. Treasure doesn't sleep quietly. It stirs envy, summons betrayal, calls trouble like a beacon. The mountain may have released its secret, but the world above was listening, watching, waiting. The rails behind them sat empty, groaning with memory, as though they knew their story wasn't over. Freddy wiped the grit from his face one last time and looked at the gold. For now, it was theirs. But in the silence that followed, both men understood the truth. Gold never stays buried, and once found, it never lets go.